Hi there, and welcome to the latest edition of the Dentro Talent podcast. I am here with Vanessa McDaid, and Vanessa and I are going to be talking about women in technology and I guess everything around that. So, Vanessa, thanks very much for taking the time to have a chat with me. Really appreciate you making the time. Um, I think probably the first place to start on this is just to explain your kind of rise to the CIO role, and then we'll dig into kind of the challenges that you've perhaps had along the way.
Great, thank you. Well, Rick, thank you very much for having me today because this is a subject that is really close to my heart. And if I share a little bit around kind of my history and my journey, then that'll probably become kind of quite clear. So I have been working in technology for about 18 years. So I had a bit of a dual career. I started my career in sales and then moved over into the world of IT, having got myself onto an IT project. And when I kind of moved into that first sort of IT role, to be honest, I was the only female working in a team full of men.
Yeah.
And, actually, while that didn't kind of impact me as an individual, it didn't kind of cramp my style, it didn't sort of suffocate my style, if you like. I'm quite happy to speak outwardly and all the rest. Actually, it became kind of quite obvious that I was different to the rest of the group. And what I mean by that is the kind of, the coffee machine conversations would be about things that weren't, kind of relevant to me. Then as I started to move through my career, it was about how do I fit into those kind of networking opportunities? There was a lot going on the golf course. I don't play golf. Or
Yeah.
corporate entertainment, would we go to a football game? Those kind of things actually became quite difficult to create opportunities for me as a female. So that's really when this topic started to become kind of quite, something I'm now quite passionate about.
Perfect. And I think all of the things that you've just mentioned, probably felt like technology is, or certainly was, a bit of a boys' club, and exclusive to men. Um, and I guess that probably pinpoints one of the things that I was just about to ask you, which is, um, why do we still only have a quarter of the workforce? Tech Nation says that I think it's 26% of the workforce in technology are female. Certainly the reasons that you've just articulated will be a part of that. Why else do you think we're just not very good at promoting technology to women?
So I think actually, Rick, it stems right back from before women are even in the world of work, right? So if we think about after GCSE level, so if we think about kind of the UK, after GCSE level, there's only 35% of females or girls choose to study STEM subjects, right?
Yeah.
That drops even lower to 25% when you go to university. Now, I did study a STEM subject. I studied chemistry, but actually so many females are dropping out of that. And if we
Mm.
go actually right back, most people think about what they're going to be when they grow up, or they start to develop those thoughts in their minds, from quite a young age. So where in society are we role modeling, females in technology or engineering or any kind of science topics? Because actually that's where it all starts to stem from. So it's about education, right? There's a statistic around like more than half of British girls do not feel confident learning maths, right?
Wow.
But actually, they outperform boys in terms of results at GCSE and A level. So there's something here, and it is quite a generalisation, just around how women show up. And if they're confident in something, then they'll put themselves forward. But actually, if they don't feel confident, then they don't feel as brave to put themselves out there in the bigger world. And actually then we see that flow through when we're thinking about applying for jobs and what have you. Women tend to only apply for a role if they think they can deliver everything on that job spec, right?
Yeah.
Whereas men have that level of confidence that just goes, I haven't done it, but I could do it, therefore I'll put my hat in the ring. And so there's something about women having more skills under their belt and then they'll apply. So, there's this thing about confidence and really getting them to be studying the right subjects, early on in their career. So yeah, it's really about that grassroots level, really, Rick.
Yeah. And I pulled out a statistic that I think there was 11% growth in 2023 of 18-year-old women starting computing degrees. So an 11% increase.
Yeah.
So there is an upwards trajectory, but it's painfully slow. And it's been this way, ever since I've worked in technology recruitment, so 20 odd years. It certainly has always been an issue, and something that, if I'm going to be completely honest, probably for the first 10 years of my career wasn't really talked about. That was just kind of how it was. And I think there's a lack of confidence, potentially because they just don't see women just don't see their peers and people they associate with going into these types of roles, and so it almost breeds a well, kind of almost like a "that's not for me" attitude, which doesn't fit, because actually, as you've already said, in terms of their ability, probably outshine men in so many areas. Um,
Exactly right, Rick. I think, we all want to see people like us in roles above us, right? It creates the right role models, and then you go, oh, do you know what? I identify with that person.
Right.
Actually, that is a door that I'm quite keen to push on, or, push through, or actually start and investigate the skills that are required to get into that area. So I absolutely agree with you, Rick. I think role modeling is really, really important.
Yeah.
So females putting themselves out there, and being the role models, but also, kind of just articulating that there are women in these careers, and, just having the conversations. You're right.
Yeah.
10 years ago, it wasn't talked about at all. Isn't it great that now those conversations are being had, and that
Yeah.
you talk about it, Rick? I think it's really important, because then while the conversation is being had, then actually change is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And as somebody who's progressed into a technology leadership position, um, and you must have faced, you know, various different challenges throughout your career, because of your gender. So, what challenges do you feel specifically you've faced that perhaps your male counterparts either wouldn't have faced or didn't face?
Yeah. So I think, Rick, it's very much around where the opportunities are created to kind of build relationships and networks across the industry. So I mentioned, things like, the golf days or the football games or what have you, those kind of networking opportunities. But also when we think about where does networking happen, right? So
Yeah.
quite often there will be networking events that may very well be in the evening. Now, as a female, females still predominantly cover most of care in a family organisation. So if you're early in your career, you may have a young family. Actually, you've got to think about, if I am, going to a networking event in the evening, actually, I'm probably the one that has got the burden to say, how am I going to cover childcare for that evening, picking up from nursery or school or what have you. So that's kind of one element, just kind of fitting it in. But then also the other point for a woman, and it's not something that people will often think about, is if I'm going to an event in the centre of town at night, I have to think as a woman, how am I going to get home from that event? It
Yeah.
isn't quite as easy for me to think about, I'll jump on the night bus or whatever it might be. Actually, as a woman, it may be, I need to take a taxi. So then there's additional cost to think about. Or, it's those kind of things that actually wouldn't always be front and centre, but, a guy to think about, actually, there's the childcare, how do I fit it in? But then also, how am I going to get home safely from that kind of event? But then the third thing, right? So I've covered all of those blocks. I've got my way home, and, I've got the
Yeah.
childcare covered. But actually, I turn up at that event. Who am I going to talk to when I get there? Who is there going to be that I can identify as someone who looks like me, that we may have something in common? And so it's the kind of chicken and egg situation. I go to an event and it is full of men, and they are, that kind of first sort of icebreaker conversation may very well be, did you watch the cricket yesterday? Or did you see the rugby at the weekend? May very well be. It's very easy to have those conversations when it's all men. But
Yeah.
actually, as a woman, it's like, how do I break into that first conversation? So initially you want to identify, find someone who looks like me that I might
Yeah.
be able to have an icebreaker kind of moment with. So yeah, there's, those kind of networking events are often where you make the opportunities, you find the connections, that then spawns other situations, different roles that are coming up or projects or other events. If you don't get to them, you're missing out on, seeing those opportunities. So yeah, there's a whole raft of things, Rick, that,
Yeah.
been in my way, if you like, just from that one example around networking events.
Yeah, and as somebody who's attended networking events and been to those types of things in the past, I can 100% categorically state that I've never had to consider any of those things. Getting home, how I'm going to do that. It's very, very, very easy for men to attend those events. Network with very much like-minded and people who look and think the same as we do, and it's also very, very easy for us to get home. So you know, those are experiences that I think need to be, and points that need to be put out there, because a lot of men, and certainly, it's not something I even give a second thought to. So how do we, as technology leaders, as even people who are recruiting in technology, um, how do we change this? How do we change the attitudes? How do we change the visibility? And how do we try to get that 1 in 4 to 1 in 3, and then better?
Yeah. So I think it's about, having the conversation. So, us talking today, Rick, and being able to then stop and think afterwards around, when you run your events, how do you think about that? But it's also then around, you and I have got a relationship and, we have conversations. As you see other women, come through your network, actually making an introduction and identifying myself as a role model and giving that younger woman earlier in her career, hey, do you know what? There's someone really great for you to talk to, someone like Vanessa. So hooking up people together, kind of creating those networks around. So the role models like myself become more visible. But it's also about a kind of mentorship, and reverse mentoring. So I would often say it's great for a female male kind of mentor relationship, and not just to think about, kind of the man, the kind of, quite often the man is the more senior role in an organization, but actually to think about it as reverse mentoring as well. So I would ask senior men across the organization to find, actually get into a reverse mentoring conversation, speaking to women earlier in their career. How can I improve your visibility? How can I think about, having those conversations? That's really where it's, that's really how we're going to drive and affect change. But I think what the bit that we're sort of missing in all of this is actually the business value of having that diverse workforce, right? I think one of my biggest fears, Rick, is if we don't do anything to change this, is we're going to be in a world, actually, particularly with AI and what have you, where
Mhm.
actually we continue to have male bias built into any of our technology or software further down the line. We just have to look backwards and think about, females in car accidents, right? And actually they don't come out as safely because crash
Yeah.
test dummies were built upon a male physique, right? So
Yeah.
actually, if we think about, kind of software development or, kind of product development, whatever it is, actually you've got to have that kind of diversity of thought in the room, not just females, but actually, all sorts of levels of diversity to make sure all those things are considered. So we build a better world ahead of us that, is so much more kind of, fair and equal to everybody. That's
Yeah.
really what we want to get to. And that's the business value here, that a diverse workforce actually creates better outcomes for the world around us.
Yeah. And that's been proven time and time again,
Yeah.
right? In all sorts of different, you know, I wouldn't be able to cite a study immediately off my head, but there are probably thousands that all promote diversity and different ways of thinking, different brain types. All of put that all into the pot, and like you say, we'll get some better outcomes. Um, in terms of outcomes, and I guess pay being probably the biggest outcome that you can have as an employee of a business. The gender pay gap is something that I wanted to cover off, and I read some really interesting statistics on this. On average, the gender pay gap is just over 7.5%, or it was last year, 2023, and that's across all sectors. In technology, it's just over 15%. First off, I'm absolutely gobsmacked by that figure, and I don't really understand how we still have such a huge discrepancy between what males are paid and what females are paid. How are we still there, and why is that still? How is it still a thing?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's shocking, isn't it, Rick? It's absolutely shocking. I mean, I think there is a glimmer of positive, right? So it has been declining. I think it's declined, that gap has declined by about a quarter in the last 10 years, but far
Okay.
too slowly, right? So it is coming down. The gap is being bridged. But I think what you're talking there, a lot of it is actually driven, that discrepancy is driven because of the higher earners, right? So the disparity really comes in the top bracket. And, that's often because there aren't women in those higher level of positions.
Mhm.
So actually, if we think about kind of females in CIO roles, right? There was a study, I think it was in about 2022, the FTSE 100, there were 25 female CIOs, right? That had only increased by 7 people since 2018. 2018, there were 18 females in the FTSE 100. So it's
Wow.
starting to close, but my God, I mean, that's terrible. That is not progress, really, is it? Right?
Glacial pace, isn't
Well,
it?
that's unbelievable.
Mm.
If we continued on that trajectory, it will be 2060 until we have the parity between 50% being male and 50% being female in the FTSE 100 CIO roles. I mean, that's just ridiculous. It's
Yeah.
it's just not okay. But it does all stem back from things about early careers, women studying the right subjects, and then getting those opportunities throughout their career. But I think something else that kind of is worrying me more, particularly as I kind of get older, is actually around obviously that kind of more senior position tends to come in the older level of workforce, right? Men tend to stay. Their average tenure in a CIO role is 3 years. For a female, it's only 2 years. So even when women get to this position, why are they then falling out of the workforce at that position, right? Why is that happening? And, what are the barriers for these later career women? And I have to say, actually, I think it's about a couple of things. It's the piece around women are still the general caregivers. And as we get
Right.
into our older age, quite often we're in that sandwich generation, older parents, family, or what have you to look after,
Yeah.
and still maybe with, younger children as well, but also the menopause, right? So we've had lots of conversations around maternity and paternity pay, and those things have happened, but actually also about menopause, and actually thinking about what does that do to a woman's confidence and, how she feels later in life. But again, I think it's positive news on that front as well, that those conversations are now being had. There is a lot going on in the workplace. But I think, unless we continue to talk about these alarming statistics around the pay gap, around the kind of, the numbers of females that aren't in these senior positions, unless we continue those conversations, we're not going to close that gap at all. And it'll be beyond 2060 that we see
Yeah.
the 50-50 split. But that's just a shocking statistic, isn't it, Rick?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can walk hard sit there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there is a big emphasis on businesses to get make yourselves as attractive as possible to women, and making sure that the right benefits and the right I guess kind of principles are there for women to be able to take time out to have children, to take time out and not suffer. um you know Certainly, if I look back at my own experiences, with 3 children, it actually didn't make financial sense for my wife to go back to work after we'd had the twins. You know, we we worked it out, and she would have needed a 20 grand pay rise
Yeah.
to to go back to work, to pay for somebody else to look after our children, and we were in a fortunate enough position where that was a choice. Um, but so many women aren't in that type of position.
Yeah. And I think then what that does, it often puts the female's kind of career on hold for a number of years, then
Yeah,
getting them back into the workforce. But also, I think now as we start to see more kind of paternity pay as well and paternity breaks, actually, I think we're seeing more, I think we will start to see more of an opportunity for, the kind of males to stay at home. And actually, it's not, I think then you're both on more of an even keel, that it's
yeah,
men and women coming out of the workforce to look after their children, during those early years. So yeah, I think that that's wonderful. But the thing for me actually is just to think about, particularly in technology, we've got this huge gap, right? Around, we've got this shortage of talent that we see in the
yeah,
marketplace. So many unfilled roles and all the rest of it. Yet we've got this untapped kind of, population in our world. And it's like, we've just got to do everything we possibly can to bring those people, bring females into the workforce and provide those opportunities for them, fill those kind of talent shortages that we're seeing across the patch.
yeah. And so look, I don't mind saying that, and you know this because we talked about it. I was a little bit nervous about tackling this subject, and you didn't take much convincing, but you convinced me it was a good idea. So as somebody who obviously believes passionately in equality, and with two daughters to raise, and and hopefully give them as the best opportunities possible. Um, how do how do how do men make a difference? How do we become allies, and how do we um, support females in their careers, and I just guess kind of getting the message out there?
Yeah. So I think it is about having the conversation is number one, right? We need to keep talking about it because then it becomes front and center. I think it's about, as fathers of daughters, I think it's about encouraging and opening their eyes to, the kind of STEM subjects and encouraging them and bringing those role models to life for them around, the great women in these areas that they can think about and aspire to. But then on a practical level, it's also about when you are having any kind of conversation and you only see one woman in the room, actually think about what is the conversation that you as guys are having around the coffee machine, right? And how do you kind of make that more less gender centric and actually make it more of a broader conversation? Or how do you bring someone in, right? I'm not saying that women don't like the same topics. Some
Yeah,
women love to talk about football, actually ask their opinions, like, and it is about that kind of level of confidence and things. How do you start and extract information from women around enabling them to sell themselves? Obviously you work in recruitment, right? So, how do you help women sort of, pull out the great achievements and outcomes from their careers and help them present themselves that, okay, not everything on this job spec is what you can do, but because you've done X, Y, and Z, transferability of those skills, those kind of things, they're the things that matter. But also, if you're running an event, making sure that woman, does she need someone to walk to the bus stop with her or want to share a taxi home or what have you? Or how do you put events on at different times of the day or different styles of events? Do they
yeah,
become more museum centric or whatever it might be, right? I think, and it's just about asking people, what do they want? Um, but then the other thing is just around the mentorship, right? About opening that door and bringing your networks alive for other people and introducing folks across your network, um, and just making sure that kind of thinking about things from a female perspective, that conversation is brought to the table. So
yeah,
these, exactly like we've done today, Rick, hugely important.
yeah. And there's some really really easy things in there that you know anybody who is, whether you're in a leadership role or whether you're running events or whatever it might be, there's some really really easy things which you can do to support females who want to attend or whatever. Um, okay. We've mentioned kind of 10 years ago, and how the conversation has moved along, from not being had to definitely, um, being had, but still a lot of work to do. So have you seen in your working life and externally a shift in attitudes in the last 5 years when it comes specifically to women in technology?
Absolutely. Yeah, I really have. And, that certainly brings a smile to my face.
Yeah.
When I kind of left a corporate career, actually, when I left the leadership team, it was getting towards a 50-50 balance of females in leadership positions in the technology team, which was just fantastic to see. That was a really, really great progress. And I'm starting to see that more now, as I'm kind of in other organizations, actually seeing more females in conversation, and just women having conversations with other women. Women in data is a great kind
Right.
of networking group. There's lots of groups formed, and so the opportunities to network and talk and introduce yourselves to each other is really, really positive. So yeah, it's there is so many more opportunities now to be had. But I also think that I suppose about 6 or 7 years ago, I felt like women sort of, being put forward for roles was often a bit of a tick box exercise, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, when you're putting forward a list of candidates, there's got to be one or two women in that list of 10, right? Actually, it doesn't feel as much of a tick box exercise now. It does feel like women are, showing up in those kind of short lists because they do have the skills and they do have the competencies to be there. What we really need to see now is, those numbers actually flowing through to the kind of top level the top table.
Yeah.
Can really see in those FTSE 100s, those numbers change from sort of, 25 in 2022 to, much higher numbers and being more of that 50-50 balance.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I'm hoping for, but I'm certainly seeing progress.
Yeah, and I think from a hiring perspective, and you mentioned kind of the tick box exercise of okay, well here's a diverse shortlist. Um, Attitudes of hiring managers has definitely changed, and will proactively kind of ask and say it would be great to have a female in this role, or it would be great to get an opportunity to interview some female candidates. So I think there is definitely a bigger drive from a hiring perspective to try and get more women into those into roles in technology. Um, the sad reality is that the pool of candidates is simply too small, and I don't think we will get to where we need to get to without addressing the kind of grassroots issues that you touched on around stem cell subjects at university, and the amount of females going into computing and technology degrees. So how do we encourage that kind of grassroots revolution, if you like, to get more women into technology?
Yeah. So I think as parents, parents of young children, there is definitely something to be doing, encouraging the confidence, through your daughters in the subjects that they're doing and their own learning. But there are also some great voluntary organisations out there actually. So there's a voluntary organisation called STEM across the UK. And I'm actually a STEM ambassador. So I go into schools and talk to females about careers in kind of these sort of worlds, technology as well as science subjects, and supporting them with kind of interview practice and kind of sharing with them kind of what sort of roles are out there and opening their eyes and, kind of minds to careers in these sort of areas. So, they're really the things that we need to be doing to kind of encourage those women to kind of, get on that journey from an early career point of view. But also then when, they get into an early part of their career into the world of work, again, it's about how do you set up those sort of buddy systems or mentoring relationships. So actually, when they've got a difficult situation or find themselves somewhere, actually they've got somewhere to turn, somewhere that actually a woman who's perhaps been through things before, to really help and coach them through different situations. There was someone that was, kind of helped me when I was thinking about kind of applying for roles and things. And, I kind of listed my achievements and whatever. And the feedback that I got was, Vanessa, you're really not selling yourself enough, right? So you've really got to oversell. And as soon as you get to the point that actually oh my goodness, I don't feel humble, or kind of,
Yeah,
I'm feel a little bit kind of arrogant selling myself here. Only then do you think you're actually selling yourself enough. And so,
yeah,
you've really got to push yourself out of that comfort zone and really be selling your competencies and capabilities. Don't be hiding any of it under a bushel, which is unfortunately generally what women tend to do.
yeah,
Push yourself out of your comfort zone, because that's really where the kind of growth and where the challenge really starts to happen.
yeah. And I think, you know, men often have a level of overconfidence, which is completely misguided. Let's be honest, yeah, a lot of the time. I think you know, it's about finding that balance and being able to sell yourself in the right way. Um, Vanessa, I really really enjoyed this conversation. So look, thank you for taking the time to have a chat. And look, hopefully it gets a few more people talking about this subject. So I really appreciate you taking the time. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much for having me and letting me talk about something that I'm so passionate about. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.